Hello my lovelies, thanks for joining me today, and also WTF regarding this one. Literally, I've watched every single interrogation and interview tape regarding this case, and it is blindsiding in nature, the deceptive level of this individual. Also, if you've ever watched the film Gone Girl, it's very resonant of that. And it really does make you question the very reality of the people that you're sharing your life with. Because when people can be so extreme in their deception, and to some degree pretty convincing, it does make the world feel a little bit more vulnerable than you wish it to be. Right, let's kick off with today's true crime video. And like I said, what a case. Let's talk about Sheri Papini. She's 34 years old at the time that this case begins to unfold. And the reason that her name is shared with investigators is because essentially she goes missing. She goes missing on the 2nd of November 2016, and it's reported that she's missing by her husband, Keith Papini, and that's because he basically realises that the normal habit that she would follow in that day has been broken. She's failed to collect their children from daycare, which is something that she would not do as far as he's concerned. So he'd actually left for work around 6:50 a.m. that morning. He kissed her goodbye. It had felt like a pretty typical morning. Then he returns home from work. He finds his home empty, no kids, no wife. So he starts making calls because he's wondering where she is. He's wondering where his children are. Now he does this quick check, as we would all do, and he realises that the two children that are in daycare haven't actually been picked up. And then he thinks to himself, well, you know, she goes running, she started running again recently. Maybe something's happened, maybe there's been an accident. You know, you start going through those psychological shifts, don't you? Something must have occurred because my children haven't been picked up and there is no way she would not pick the children up. So that dread begins to mount. And he uses the Find My iPhone, which is what many of us have got now. And that means that you can at least locate where their phone is if you can't actually find the person. And when he does that, he finds her phone at the side of the road. Also, he finds her earbuds and a few strands of hair on her earbuds, and it's on her usual jogging route. So he's really concerned. He immediately thinks to himself, something terrible has happened. In fact, he immediately goes into what I would consider is a bit of a detective role. He takes a photograph of the earbuds and of the phone because he wants to make sure that he doesn't move any evidence that could essentially be incriminating or lead to suspects being brought forward, because immediately he's thinking to himself, something terrible has happened to my wife. He then dials at 911, as you would, because automatically you're going to think the worst has happened. You find her earbuds and her iPhone by the side of the road. There's literally hair that belongs to her that seems to have been ripped out. You're going to think something terrible has befallen her. So he calls 911, opens a missing persons case. But he's very clear on the phone call that he immediately thinks that he is dealing with a situation where she's probably been abducted. She's been going for a run, somebody's pulled over, and essentially she has been taken from that spot.
911, what is your CHP transfer? Keith is on the line. Hello, can I help you?
Hello? Yeah, I just got home from work, and my wife wasn't there, which is unusual, and my kids should have been there by now from, like, daycare. So I was like, oh, maybe she went on a walk. I couldn't find her, so I called the daycare to see what time she picked up the kids. The kids were never picked up, so I got freaked out. So I hit like the Find My iPhone app thing, and it said that it showed her phone like at our end of our driveway. We don't have really good service.
Okay.
Not the end of our driveway, but the end of our street. So I just drove down there, and I saw her phone with her headphones because she started running again. And I found her phone, and it's got like hair ripped out of it, like in the headphones. So I'm like totally freaking out, thinking like somebody grabbed her.
Okay, what's your address?
Reading.
Okay, what's your last name?
Yes. Papini, P-A-P-I-N-I.
And your first name?
Keith.
Is her vehicle there? Does she not have a vehicle?
She has a vehicle at the house.
Okay, the vehicle is at the house?
She's running.
How? Okay.
Yes, I'm in it right now driving, and I took a picture of her phone on the ground before I picked it up.
Okay, are you headed back to the house, or where are you at right now?
I'm at the end of the driveway I'm at the Old Oregon Trail and Sunrise where they meet, because that's right where I found her phone, on the ground. You're telling me that something happened to her is the way I'm looking at it. Then there was hair like in the headphones. Like it got ripped off, or like the grab.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Okay, I'm sorry. I know
That's
you're
okay.
trying to keep me calm, but obviously.
Yeah. What kind of vehicle are you in?
I'm in a black Kia Optima.
Now, as he suspected, it did turn out that she had indeed gone for a run in the afternoon, but she hadn't returned home. So his theory is adding up, it's making sense. But let's talk about Sheri Papini and who she was before we move on to exactly what plays out. So she's the mother of 2 young children. They have a 4-year-old son at the time, Tyler, and a 2-year-old daughter, Viola. Absolutely gorgeous names. And her family described her genuinely as an absolute supermom. She was somebody who was, at the time, very devoted to her children, so they're obviously frantic that she's disappeared. Family members said that her not picking up her children was immediately a massive red flag, including her husband. He said it's completely out of character. The family at the time lived in a rural home in Mountain Gate, Shasta County. So this is a typical mom of 2. She's basically going about her business, going about her day, and she has vanished into thin air. And her husband is absolutely devastated. He automatically thinks that something terrible has happened. And to some degree, I think from the very immediacy of this case, he has a level of frustration within the investigation, because I imagine he's thinking potentially his wife has been abducted, but also he's probably thinking maybe something truly dreadful has happened to her. So he's probably working on the theory that it might not get her back. Now, when they start to ask around and the investigation begins, it turns out she'd been last seen jogging alone. She'd been seen on Sunrise Drive in Reading. Now, over the next few days, more than 100 volunteers start helping in the search. Her family, her friends, they're all rallying around Keith to help take care of the children, and also to do the most important thing, was to keep her name out there, to make sure that anybody who's got any information is going to come forward, because not only are they dealing with a situation where she potentially has been abducted, but that could also mean that there is a dangerous person, or indeed people, going around abducting individuals from the side of the road. And the press are really intrigued as to what's happened, and also they want to hear from Keith Papini, her husband. And in an interview with ABC News, he's saying, everybody who knows my wife knows there's absolutely no reason for her to leave. She was definitely taken against her will. Because bear in mind, obviously, when the police start to investigate a case, as we all know, they don't just go automatically for that the person has been abducted. Because it could be that she had decided that she was going to leave of her own volition. It could be that she'd left the mobile phone and the earbuds just to kind of deflect, to make it look like she'd been taken, but actually she could have just disappeared because she wanted to leave her relationship, shall we say. So they're thinking about potentials like that. Also, they will be looking in his direction as a husband and thinking to themselves, you know what? It could actually be that we're dealing with a husband who's killed his wife. So they're not automatically going to be going with the theory that he has, which is Sheri Papini has been taken on her run against her will and is probably in imminent danger. He said she could drop a phone, but she would never in a million years not pick up our children on time that she normally would have. So he's immediately being brought back to that idea that I know my wife, and I know that no matter what's going on in this world, even the way that she might have felt towards him, the people that she would never let down would be the children. And that is a belief that he absolutely has wholeheartedly. And I would say that from the get-go, Keith Papini is not afraid to talk to the press because he's completely innocent. He knows he's done nothing to his wife. He knows that this is completely out of character as far as he's concerned. And all he cares about is getting the message out there, please bring my wife home. Now, on the 17th of November, investigators actually discover that Papini had been texting a man from Michigan. Now, this was days before her disappearance, so they're obviously intrigued about that. They're like, why is she talking to this guy? Could this guy have any relationship to her disappearance? So the officers then interview him, but it turns out that he wasn't actually involved, which is really frustrating. But they start to look at this case with, I would say, a little bit of suspicion. They feel like there's a few oddities around what's been playing out when they start to look into her background and also look at some of the messages on her phone and the conversations that she's been having and the people she's been speaking to. And one of the things that they're looking at and finding a bit strange is, for example, 2 men are found among her phone contacts, but they're actually listed under women's names. And I guess that you could say, well, you know what, if you've got a jealous partner, potentially you're going to make sure that guys that you're just innocently chatting to, maybe you're stored under females' names because you don't want any issues. So that could be a reason. But also it could be that maybe you are being a little bit naughty on a private level and you don't want your partner to find out about that. But essentially it's going to cause an issue that the police might have about her character, because bear in mind she's being named as supermom and they're looking into her background and conversations and contacts and potentially thinking maybe there are other things going on behind closed doors in her life, and that's causing them, like I said, a little bit of concern. Apparently one man allegedly travelled to meet up with her in 2011, and this is obviously when she's actually married, and the pair had basically carried on exchanging what I would suggest are flirtatious text messages, and they had occurred throughout the years. So you can understand why that would not be something that her husband would be very happy about. Now, the second guy, he actually told investigators that he met Papini at a Friday Night Live youth programme. It was around the year 2000. Apparently they dated for some time after that. He said that one of the things that was clear to him from the get-go in their relationship was that he felt that she was attention hungry, and also that she had this really negative trait as far as he was concerned, because she fabricated stories of being the victim of abuse from her family, from her father, and then apparently from him. So after they break up, he gets put in the crosshairs as well, and she's suggesting that he's been abusive. So that's obviously something that will have been a bitter pill to swallow as far as he's concerned. He will have no doubt have been tender and understanding and caring and compassionate, because of course if somebody is telling you that their family has been highly abusive, their father has been abusive, then you are going to welcome them with open arms in a compassionate manner. Psychologically, most of us just feel that natural empathy and connection because we look at somebody and we think they're vulnerable, they're somebody who's struggled. So that's an intimacy builder and a bridge builder when people confide in us about their innermost secrets and pain. And so this guy feels really duped afterwards when essentially she does the same about him. So she's fabricating these stories. Now that doesn't mean anything, of course, because we all know, particularly when we're younger, some of us try to, shall we say, elevate our experience in the world, make ourselves seem a little bit more interesting. And that can sometimes mean playing with the truth a little bit. And it doesn't come from a really bad place. It's one of those things that we do to make ourselves seem, well, a little bit more interesting and engaging in certain areas. Or maybe we pretend we've done things that we haven't actually done because somebody we like has done them and we just want to connect with them in a way that makes them think we're cool. But there is something deeply malicious, isn't there, about saying that somebody's abused you. I mean, that is really taking it to the extreme. And again, one can say, well, if you're having a bad time and you want people to empathise with you, it's a quick fix in those circumstances. Equally, we can argue it's a relatively malevolent thing to do to somebody, to actually have a relationship with them and then go around saying that they've been abusing you when it's not true. Because that can have an impact on future relationships with that person. It can have an impact on friendships that they have because people look at them in a different way. It can even impact on jobs that they get, because you know what? People hear about things and no one's going to want to be around somebody who apparently has been abusive to an ex-partner. It makes sense that that kind of character assassination is a really dangerous thing. Equally, we can say, well, it's hearsay. At the end of the day, this could be a bitter ex talking about somebody who upset them, and they could be the one fabricating things. However, I would give some weight to what that guy was saying, because the director of that very youth programme where he and Papini met actually was really scared of having her in the programme because apparently, quote, she was good at creating different realities for people so that they would see what she wanted them to see, which got her really good attention. And I think we can read between the lines there. I think what that person's saying is she was a liar, and that made us feel a little bit unsafe to be around because, hey, no one wants to be in a situation where they're by themselves with somebody who just makes stuff up. It can be really dangerous and really damaging for you. And even friends, when investigators are speaking to them, said Sheri Papini would just make up lies. And she had this particular penchant for making lies up about being a victim of abuse. They said as a young person, it was kind of a prolific reality for her that she would just constantly make things up about abuse because she wanted people to feel sorry for her. She wanted to stand out as a victim. And it's one of those things that's really troubling. It's troubling on a multi-level basis. First of all, it's troubling because people actually are victims of abuse. And when you're speaking to people and you're sharing that kind of information and you're lying, it's really disrespectful. And also, it means that people who would not ordinarily open up sometimes do. Because essentially, if you've been a victim of abuse, physical, sexual, neglectful, emotional, and then somebody is saying to you, this has happened to me, it can give you that confidence and incentive to say, wow, that happened to me too. And that's a very precious shared space. And to be down the line finding out that somebody has deceived you, that can re-traumatize you. So on one level, that's a possibility. But on another level, think about the people that you're actually accusing and the impact that has on their reputation. That's hugely impactful. And on top of that, what does it say about your character? I mean, aside from the obvious, which is that you're not somebody who is trustworthy, it also says that for whatever reason, as a human being, your personality requires others to firstly believe that you have gone through experiences that you haven't, but secondly, to validate them through their empathy, through their compassion. So you are basically exploiting not just the people you're accusing, not just the people who are connecting with you because they've been through it, but also the individuals who lend you their ears and compassion. And you're willing to do that because it makes you feel good as a human being. You're not concerned about the impact on anyone else. It's a very egocentric point of view. And when people are younger, people at times will do this because they are struggling to get some kind of attention. They feel that maybe they are lacking in certain areas. And even though that is still not acceptable, when you're a teenager, you are afforded, shall we say, an opportunity to grow out of those things. People do. But when you're an adult, we lose any sense of empathy or compassion because you know how the world operates at that point. You know that you should try your best to be as truthful as possible. We all tell white lies. We all do things that are wrong. We all try to save our skin at times by maybe, shall we say, telling a white lie. But for the most part, we know and we get the feedback of guilt when we do things that are wrong, such as fabricate reality, which is why we tend to grow out of those big lies that we may have told as teenagers. And again, many people don't lie in a big way as teenagers, but we can afford teenagers those mistakes as long as they learn from them. That's the key, isn't it? Now, local police obviously start to take this really seriously. She's disappeared. No one's figured out what's happened to her. And they end up interviewing over 290 people. Now, clearly, there are a lot of people who are thinking that she genuinely has been abducted, as her husband feels, and the police clearly believe that her disappearance is incredibly suspicious. And indeed, when they're advertising that she's just disappeared off the face of the earth, they do receive 600 tips because the public are good and they want to help. But you can imagine that's a hell of a lot of work to do, isn't it? To kind of either credit or discredit those 600 tips. Now, like I said, whilst this is all going on an investigation level, you've got volunteers literally everywhere searching for her. And her actual family offered $50,000 for information that could have led to her being found because this is their desperation. And there are international headlines. There are actually rallies supporting her. And like I said, because you guys care, there was a GoFundMe that was put out there and $49,000 were raised. So that's a lot of people wanting to bring her home because this is a beautiful young mother of two who essentially could be in a very dire situation. Keith apparently at this point was very frustrated. He felt there wasn't a lot of progress being made and he actually sought help from a guy called Cameron Gamble. Now, Cameron Gamble is a hostage negotiator. He did manage to bring in an anonymous donor who offered a $50,000 ransom for Sheri's return. Now, when she didn't turn up, the donor apparently rescinded the ransom offer and then offered a higher sum for anyone with information on Sheri's disappearance. So essentially with the ransom and the reward and as well a website being launched all about Sheri Papini's disappearance, it's made national headlines and everyone is talking about it. 1 week goes by, 2 weeks goes by, 2.5 weeks go by, and still there is no sign of Sheri Papini. And let's be honest, for most of us at this point, we'd be thinking Sheri Papini is dead. Because 24 hours after somebody disappears, there's a strong possibility they are never going to come home. And the agony and trauma and terror and sadness that Sheri Papini's family is going to have gone through must have been unbelievable. And then this miracle happens. This absolute miracle. And in fact, the day itself is so symbolic because on Thanksgiving, Sheri Papini is found safe. It's the morning, 22 days after her disappearance. At this point, a motorist spots Sheri walking along the side of the road in Yolo County, Calif. It's about 150 miles away from Reading, and she's basically flagged them down. They alert authorities, and it is an absolute celebration. So Shasta County Sheriff Tom Pasenko said she was able to walk to a nearby church, but nobody was there at 4:30 a.m. in the morning. And then she walked back and was able to flag down a motorist near Interstate 5 and Yolo County Road 17. She was bound with restraints, but she managed to summon help from a passing motorist and he called 911. She also appeared heavily battered. So essentially, she was in a real state when they arrived and they brought medical aid to the scene. She was then taken to the hospital just outside of Shasta County. She didn't have life-threatening injuries, but she was beaten up. At this point, they tell the press that Papini was in a stable condition. She was going to be okay. And also they informed the public that she'd been reunited with the family on the same day, which must have been an unbelievable celebration. You cannot even begin to comprehend, can you? Getting that call, being told your wife, the mother of your children, or your daughter has been found safe after 3 weeks. Apparently her husband, Keith, was absolutely overjoyed. He couldn't believe it. He drove straight to the hospital and he said, my first sight was my wife in a hospital bed, her face covered in bruises ranging from yellow to black because of her repeated beatings. The bridge of her nose broken. She'd been branded and I could feel the rise of her scabs under my fingers. Now bear in mind, Keith had been put through the mill, shall we say. You know, he had actually had to take a polygraph test. Obviously he'd passed it because he'd done nothing wrong, but clearly they were looking in his direction. They were thinking, you know what? Who is usually responsible when a wife or a husband goes missing? Yep, it's the partner. So he had been in the line of fire, but it hadn't bothered him because he knew he was completely innocent. But he finds his wife, the love of his life, the mother of his children, in an absolutely battered state. Apparently she weighed only 87 pounds when she was found. Also, her long blonde hair had just been cut short. So she was beaten up, she looked different, she was really skinny. And her husband is coming to that realization, oh my God, my wife has probably just endured 3 weeks of absolute hell. And in that first meeting, it's the point of celebration. It's an opportunity to have that moment where they realise that the life that they thought was going to be over for one another is actually still present. And the future is something that hopefully getting over the trauma can be shared together. If anything, that they can feel stronger because he had gone out of his way to make sure that her name was everywhere. That was an absolutely evident part of who he was as a partner, that he loved her deeply. And even though she's been through this horrific situation, on a psychological level as a partner, you're like, this guy did everything in his power. And so to some degree, Sheri Papini is in really safe hands with him. And when the police start to speak to her, it's clear that she's been through this incredibly traumatic experience. And she's telling the police and investigators bit by bit exactly what has happened. So she tells the police that she was kidnapped by 2 Hispanic women, and the investigators put out this information saying that they were looking for a dark-coloured SUV with 2 Hispanic females who at the time had apparently been armed with a handgun, which is quite unusual with respect. In fact, it's very unusual to hear about women abducting anybody unless they are actually with a guy. I mean, that happens, but it's really rare for 2 women to be the kidnappers. So this makes it stand out even more. Bear in mind, she as a victim looks terrible. Aside from all those things that I've talked about, she'd even been branded on her right shoulder. Her nose was swollen. She'd got bruises on her face. She'd got rashes on her left arm. She'd got a rash on her left upper inner thigh, also on other parts of her body. Apparently she had ligature marks on her wrists and ankles. She had burns on her left forearm. She had bruising on her pelvis and on the front of both her legs. So she's in a state. And they don't interview her for long periods of time initially, because understandably it's been highly traumatic. So there are multiple interviews carried out by investigators. And to some degree, what they struggle a little bit with is that the details change in every interview to some degree, but with respect, the general story stays the same. And her story is that on the 2nd of November 2016, she had indeed gone for a jog, as everybody suspected. Then she notices this dark coloured SUV and there's 2 Hispanic women inside. So she kind of sees them and recognises that they're beckoning her over. Apparently they look like they might have needed some help. 2 women, you're not going to be that worried, are you? You're going to be like, maybe they need directions. You know, women trust women. So as Papini goes over to that vehicle, all of a sudden, one of the women pulls a gun on her. Now that's going to be terrifying. I mean, suddenly these people you've gone over to help, they're confronting you potentially with your life being taken. So in that moment, you're not going to know what to do, but the chances are you're going to think, well, I'm going to have to do what they say, because the alternative is that I'm going to get shot. Now, we all know that the best thing to do is to not comply, start screaming, shouting and running. But in this case, she decided that she was going to leave her phone behind because she felt that by doing that, there would be some evidence of where she was taken, and also indeed that she had been taken, that she'd not gone of her own volition. At this point, she gets into the vehicle. Now, I would say that's an unusual thought to have. And also, if I was one of the 2 Hispanic women and I saw her drop her phone, I'd probably think that's a little bit strange. Equally, I wouldn't want her bringing a phone, because that would be an issue, because they would then potentially be able to track exactly where I'd taken her. So it could be that they've happily allowed her to drop the phone because they don't want her to be able to be traced. She then said that she actually slept most of the drive and she couldn't figure out where she was taken. Again, that's quite unusual, because a trauma response would be, on the whole, you'd have adrenaline and cortisol just soaring through your system and you'd be absolutely terrified because you've been kidnapped. Equally, some people could say, well, people shut down, and maybe it was just a coping mechanism, a survival mechanism, that psychologically she's so fraught by what's just played out that she essentially shuts down and sleep is the escape. Now, she tells the investigators that she didn't remember getting out of the vehicle. The first thing that she remembers is waking up in a room. At this point, she's horrified because she realises she's got zip ties around her wrists and she's no longer in her clothes that she'd been jogging in. So that's really affronting, isn't it? The idea that somebody has actually removed your clothes, you don't have a memory of it, and essentially you've been violated in this way. Because if you don't remember your clothes being removed, what else don't you remember? But what she doesn't say is that she was actually drugged. I would assume that if she's saying that she doesn't remember anything and that she doesn't remember her clothes being removed, that you would make that connection that potentially she had indeed been drugged, but she doesn't say that that's something she has any recollection of. She also talks about the people who abducted her and said they spoke in Spanish the majority of her time in captivity, so she didn't really understand what they were saying. Also, they allegedly concealed their faces because they obviously didn't want to show her who they were. So most of the time they'd have masks over half their face. And she did provide some information about the suspects. So suspect number 1 was apparently younger. Again, that's relatively vague. She was younger. Younger than what? Younger than the other. How old was the other one? Older. So one was younger, yes. And one was older, yes. You know, quite vague. But this one, who was younger, had long curly hair. She had a thick accent. Apparently she had pierced ears and thin eyebrows. So clearly not the most, shall we say, detailed of descriptions. Now, suspect number 2 was indeed older. So just how old? Just older. Older than what? Older than the younger one. How old though? Just older than the younger one, who is younger than the older one. Ugh, how much more descriptive do you require? So very vague. So she's older. She had thick black hair with greying colour within it and thick eyebrows. So we've got one thin eyebrows, one thick eyebrows. So one's older with thick eyebrows, one's younger with thin eyebrows. So essentially, it's obvious who did it. We should just be able to immediately go and arrest them with that kind of detail. It is clear that she has done the job of the investigators for them. She also said that they played constant loud music from a speaker that was placed outside of a locked room. Now, I get it, because in the movies that happens, you see it, don't you? Where somebody's got some information and the CIA have to deal with this person or some special forces, and they're like, we're not allowed to waterboard anymore, let's just play really loud music. And in the end, that death metal's gonna make them go over the edge. So I can get it. In the movies, that plays out. I'm sure it probably does in certain torturous situations. But she also claimed that anytime she made any noise, the captors would come running into her room. So that makes no sense. If they're playing loud music outside of her room most of the time, how are they going to hear her making any noise in the room? Because there's loud music being played outside the room, which is going to absolutely discount her making any noise in the room. Sorry to notice that, but it just doesn't make sense. I like a bit of logic when stories are being told. So she ends up telling the investigators that one of the women actually told her that they were going to sell her to a cop, which is supposed to be a quick fix for her going home, because that cop could then say, I'll get the reward because I found this person who has gone missing. But I'm presuming they're suggesting that she's going to get sex trafficked. Now, she said that after 3 weeks, for some reason, again, vague, there's a reason, but she doesn't know the reason, the younger of the two abductors basically said, get in the SUV. She drives into Woodland, she's freed, and this is where she's finally found. And she was apparently released with a chain around her waist, a zip tie on her wrist, and clamps around her ankles. So, like I said, in a bad way, she looks terrible. She's just been found in this place miles and miles away from her home, and it seems that she's been through this horrific ordeal. But a little bit like me, some people were a bit skeptical of the story, and some people actually start saying, maybe she made this up, maybe it was just an elaborate hoax. And an anonymous source was quoted, who was apparently, by the way, a friend of the Papini family, and they had said that she had staged her own abduction. And I guess that initially, when the investigators were looking at her, everything didn't make perfect sense, because the circumstances behind the disappearance and the return were actually unusual. But the sheriff said at that time, listen, there's no reason to disbelieve her. Things can be strange and still be true. And they make it clear that they really are continuing the investigation. But for the most part, they're dealing with a victim, and people need to understand that. And again, the sheriff reiterated that she wasn't massively detailed, she wasn't massively forthcoming initially with information, but that was not unusual. He said, we don't have any reason to not believe her. She was abducted, she was held captive for 3 weeks and then released. He said traumatized from the experience, and then of course very emotional about being released and then being reunited with her husband. All of these things are big, and sometimes people who've been in a traumatic event, their mind shields them from some of the trauma, so they do have limited recollection. And also, if you try to push to get some of those details, people can shut down and not want to re-experience or try to recall some of those bad memories. And that's absolutely true. People with post-trauma have massive blanks in their memories at times. It's deeply upsetting for them, because you don't just lose the bad points, you lose the good points as well. And it means that you can't figure out exactly what went on, and you have this void, and that's very frustrating and upsetting. And so he's just reiterating that all these people who are being armchair detectives, people like me, for example, they are not necessarily being helpful to a victim. And in those early days, after she had actually been returned home, her husband, Keith Papini, who's obviously completely devoted to her, 100% behind her, he gives a statement to Good Morning America, because clearly there's all this speculation and suspicion that's really upsetting them as a family. And he said, we are not going to allow those people to take away our spirit. We can rejoice in the fact that our girl was found alive. She's home where she belongs. He said, I understand people want the story, pictures, proof that this was not some sort of hoax or plan to gain money or some fabricated race war. He said, I do not see a purpose in addressing each preposterous lie. So clearly they were the accusations that were being levied at them. Now, unfortunately and frustratingly for the family, in the months after her reappearance, there were no arrests. So they didn't find these two Hispanic women. And also, one of the things that the investigators struggled with was that they couldn't actually find a motive. They didn't know why she'd been taken and then returned. And apparently there hadn't been anything clear about why it had occurred and what the intentions were, because there was no financial gain. She was damaged to some degree but was okay. There wasn't clarity, and that was confusing them. So they're continuing to investigate this because they want to figure it out. And there are some inconsistencies about what she's talking about regarding what happened. And one of the things that bothers them is that the evidence that she presents includes saying that she'd cut her foot in an altercation with one of her captors. But there wasn't an injury that matched that description when she's hospitalised. So it's clear that investigators have some concerns, but again, it's not completely out of context for individuals who are victims to go through these kind of problems, remembering, recollecting, dealing with the absolute fine details because they have been so broken by their experiences. Now, one of the breakthroughs in this case is in October 2017, when the authorities actually revealed that both male and female DNA was found on Sheri's clothing. This is after her escape. So now at least they have two profiles, and those profiles can be explored. Sadly, that DNA did not belong to anybody on the police databases, and they suggested that maybe the DNA of the male could have been from acquaintances of Sheri's captors who'd owned the clothing that she woke up in, because as we know, she apparently woke up in clothes that weren't hers. Then in September 2019, the DNA profile of that male that was found on her clothing was submitted for familial testing. Now, familial testing is a process that searches databases for near matches. So matches that have some kind of relation to the actual profile that they've got, but might not be an absolute direct match. Don't get me wrong, sometimes they are, like a brother or a sister, a mother or a father, but even cousins, it helps you to start, as long as it's like a first cousin, for example, to home in on who the perpetrator could be, or indeed who an individual could be in relation to the perpetrator. Now, from that process, a match was found. So this is in March 2020. So they are celebrating because, of course, finally, this is going to lead them potentially to the actual individuals responsible for Sheri Papini's abduction and the horrible treatment that she's been through. But this is where it all gets, I don't know how to put this, guys, a little bit on the awkward side, because the DNA of the male that's been found on that clothing isn't actually a Hispanic woman. In fact, it's nothing to do with any of the descriptors that I've talked about so far, because that DNA belongs to Sheri's ex-boyfriend. Like I said, awkward. So after they'd created this link with her ex-boyfriend through familial DNA, they then homed in on him by basically comparing the DNA found from a bottle of green tea outside of his apartment, and it is an absolute match for that profile that they collected. So clearly, they're going to want to have a conversation with him. He's not Hispanic, he's not female, he's not got thin eyebrows either, just to throw it out there. But he is a complete DNA match. So on the 10th of August 2020, he basically agrees to a police interview. Immediately during that interview, he admits that he had helped her run away. So the story gets curiouser and curiouser, because like I said, when you listen to this story and when you listen to the interviews that she has given and the interrogations that have occurred, it is absolutely shocking. Because like I said, we can afford teenagers the fantasies that they sometimes create to fit in or to get attention. But when we're talking about an adult mother of two who's essentially fabricated an entire reality at a cost not only financially, but emotionally, to many of those people who love and care for her, and to the investigators who spent a huge amount of time diligently investigating this case, it shows the level of exploitation that this woman is absolutely willing to go to for attention. So he says that he'd known her since they were teenagers, and that he basically was contacted out of the blue, and at this point, a bit like one of her exes talked about, where she accused him of being abusive towards her, so too does Papini start telling this ex that her husband is beating her and raping her and that she's just desperate to try to escape. So he told investigators that he'd driven from his home in Southern California to Redding on the 2nd of November 2016 to pick her up, and he met her after her morning jog. And he did confirm that, as she suggested to investigators, that she slept most of the drive south, lying across the back seat of the Dodge Challenger. He then told the investigators that she stayed in his apartment. Apparently she ate very little, so she purposely lost weight. She cut her own hair. And then towards the end of the stay, she asked him to brand her with a crafting implement purchased at Hobby Lobby. I'm not imagining that Hobby Lobby are that happy that branding equipment from their particular store was used in this case, but there we go. Nonetheless, it does make me go, what was he thinking? Like, seriously, what was he thinking? Now, I am not saying that this guy is a bad guy, because he clearly isn't. In fact, he's the kind of guy who will help somebody out in a bad situation. That's obvious from his actions. But I do think to myself, what was going on in his mind at the time, genuinely? Because I was going to throw it out there, guys. If somebody called you and was like, I really need you to help me as your ex, which is weird anyway, because they're an ex. As your ex, I need you to come and help me because I'm in a really bad situation. Oh no, what's happening? My current partner is highly abusive and I need to be able to escape. Well, I will help you because I'm a really nice person. Great. So I need you to pick me up on my morning jog. Why? Can you just get a cab here? No. I need you to get me on my morning jog. I also need you to understand I'm going to leave my iPhone and my AirPods just kind of on the floor. I might rip out a bit of my hair as well. This is getting weird. Just go with me. Then I need to come to your apartment. You'll notice that I don't eat very much. That would worry me because I don't want you to get sick. I'm actually coming to help you, not to make you worse. Yeah, just shut up and just listen to this. It's going to be fine. Then I want you to potentially beat me up a bit, or at least let me beat myself up a bit. And on top of that, I'm going to cut my hair off. And, oh, there's this bit where I want you to brand me. Okay, that seems completely rational. I mean, when does that not happen on an average Monday? Exactly. Let's just, when can you come? When can you come? You know, genuinely, that happened. And I'm like, at what point did he think, maybe this isn't okay? Surely at the point where she was like, you know what? I just need you to go to Hobby Lobby, get some kind of branding machine and just like brand me. How has that got anything to do with being in an abusive relationship? Like, seriously? It's just not typical in any way, shape or form. I don't understand. I have thought about this quite a lot. When I watched all the interviews, when you see it all falling apart for her and she's being confronted with reality, there is just this part of my brain going, how did it get to that point? Even if you believe that somebody is being horribly abused by their partner, how does that equate to them starving themselves in your house, asking you to brand them and beating themselves up to some degree so that they look really injured? Oh, and then getting dropped off somewhere random. You know, it just doesn't make any sense, does it? And he basically says that when he ends up taking her back, it's because she apparently missed her children. And he just goes ahead and drops her off where she tells him to. But again, bear in mind, you've gone through all that. And then she's saying, oh, in spite of the fact that I've got this horribly abusive situation, I want to go home because I miss my kids. Why didn't he go, do you know what? This just doesn't make sense to me. Like, first of all, you look really beaten up and you've been in my home and you've been missing for a while and there are a lot of people looking for you and that could be really incriminating for me. So I just don't know where his mind was. I genuinely don't. I know it will have come from a good place, but I do think when it comes down to gullibility, if there was some kind of award for it, I do feel that he would definitely be in the top 3. I mean, probably in the top 2 if I'm completely honest. Now, clearly the investigators have got her. Absolutely, 100%. They've got him admitting everything. They now know that all of the things that she's spoken to them about are fabricated. she's banged to rights. It's as simple as that. And phone records from both her and her ex-boyfriend actually corroborate everything that he's said. So the retelling of events fits perfectly. Apparently they also bought prepaid phones, so burner phones to communicate. So this has been a real exploitation of him and a real exploitation of everybody around her, because there have been children involved, little children, a husband who's devoted to her, family who adore her, and this has just all been absolute BS. So we get to the 13th of August 2020 and the investigators interview Sheri Papini again. And during this interview, she's repeatedly warned by the interrogators that to lie to the FBI is a crime because they're the ones who are dealing with her. So she's being told this is a very serious offence. If you are telling lies when you know what the truth is, and we know what the truth is, and you're choosing still to be deceptive, big problem. And you can see her husband, Keith, is just sitting there like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on at all. But equally, she's just kind of focused on him. You know, she can hear what's being said by the interrogators, but equally, at the end of the day, she doesn't want to kind of concentrate on that. She wants to concentrate on her husband. There's almost a beseeching level to the way that she's being. And essentially, the big question that they're asking is, do you want your husband present when we share the information that we've got?
If you want Keith to leave, I'll ask Keith nicely to leave. If you don't want Keith to leave, then he can sit
say,
and
let's
listen
press
to
on.
you,
Press on.
and we'll move on to the next stages. But I want to give you that opportunity first. But obviously everything's fearful. If you tell him to leave and what I'm going to say is benign, then we can pull him back in the room like, hey, Keith, come back in. This is what we talked about.
And when the FBI agents leave the room and she kind of looks at her husband and is like, I'm really devastated by this situation because at the end of the day, I don't want one of my abductors who freed me to actually be investigated and found guilty. I need to protect her. Now, I get it. We all know that Stockholm Syndrome is a real thing. It is where people who have been abducted form an alliance and an allegiance with the people who are actually perpetrators in the crime. And when it comes down to prosecution, they don't feel happy about it because they feel a level of protection. In fact, they become the person who wants to look after the abductor as opposed to do what they should do, which is send them to prison for a very long time. So it could be that we're dealing with Stockholm Syndrome, but it just feels very off. And you can see husbands starting to think, this does not make sense. And I guess that also there'll be variables that have played out during these years as this crime has been investigated where things haven't made sense anyway. And adding to that his experience of his wife, probably all of those red flags just become this enormous, overwhelming reality. But even in that moment, he's still present with her. You know, he's still believing in her. Those FBI agents leave because they know they've got her. And they know that the moment they tell her the information that they've got, it's going to be life-changing for everyone involved. So when the FBI agents return and they disclose to Sheri Papini and indeed to Keith the fact that she's made it all up, they know she's made it all up, they've spoken to her ex-boyfriend who's confirmed all of that he was indeed the person who collected her of her own volition, of her own desire, something that she actually created, that she was the one who'd injured herself, instead of being like, oh God, that's really embarrassing. It's really embarrassing, guys, you know, at the end of the day. A bit of method acting that went a little bit too far. On reflection, it got a bit bigger than I imagined it would get, and at the end of the day, I'm guilty as hell. That would still be terrible because, you know, you'd be like, oh my God, you know, worst case scenario, the whole world who has been invested in my case is going to realize I'm a massive liar. That's where your head's going to be, or at least the average person. But Sheri Papini, she's not the average person. She'll have all that running through her head, won't she? She'll be like, could just admit it. Could just be like, yeah, I like a bit of attention. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Probably should have stopped at the thinking about getting branded. That was probably a little bit of a step too far. Probably spent quite a lot of time away as opposed to just a few days. didn't majorly imagine that it would become this international issue, and I'm in a bit too deep. You know, that's going to be going through her head. Maybe I should just say all that. But instead she's like, yeah, that's terrible to admit. It's really bad. People will be like, oh, Sheri Papini is a massive liar, so I'm going to go for more lies. I'm going to go for more lies. I think that we all agree that if you've told a lie and the lie's been found out, that probably the best way to deal with it is to lie more. And then when that lie gets found out, just lie again. And then ideally, lie to a point where everyone is so confused that they believe that the lie is the truth. It'll be fine. So I'm just going to go, oh my God, it can't be my ex-boyfriend. He wouldn't want to do that. He couldn't possibly do that. So instead of just going, okay, you found me out, she's like, no, I'm not going to retract my kidnapping story. Instead, I'm going to start making some false statements about him.
The DNA that was on you belongs to James Reyes.
The picture, and can I get the picture? The picture of the table is James Reyes' little brother. He died recently. We talked to him. He's been on a polygraph. We talked to everybody around him. We have the rental agreements, phone rental, the car rental agreements. We have everything that says that he said he told the truth.
That's James' brother, deceased, Nick.
So everything, you've told us so many truths in this situation. The reason why you can describe the room is because you stayed in the room in the dark for hours, for days on end. The reason why you lost so much weight is because you stopped eating. The reason why you got a rash on your arm is because you cleaned his house. The reason why the brand is because he went to the store, bought the branding tools, and branded you. The reason why your nose was broke is because of a hockey stick. I know all of those things, and I know there was no sex. I know all of that because he passed a polygraph test that said it's not an abduction. She asked me to come get her.
No.
I rented a car.
No.
I drove up and picked her up. He passed the polygraph test, Sheri.
If that's not what happened, what did happen, Sheri?
I don't know. No, there's no way it's James. There's no way. There's no
The
way.
DNA doesn't lie.
His DNA,
His DNA was on you.
his brother,
no way.
Robert, saw you in the house while you were down there. While everything
Who's
spun out of
Robert?
control, his cousin. Why everything ran out of control on the initial.
There's no way.
It's 100% Robert's or James's DNA.
We even collected blonde hairs from the room.
There's no way it's James. There's no way.
Tell you that it is.
Why are you saying it's not James?
So instead of doing what would have made perfect sense and just admitting that she's absolutely made this up, she just makes out that it couldn't possibly be her ex. He wouldn't do that. And she can't quite get her head around the fact that this is the case. And she kind of repeats her earlier story about being abducted by these two Hispanic women. She says that she hadn't met up with her ex, but then she can't actually confirm that she definitely hadn't. And it's just a mess. But like I said, instead of just accepting I've been found out, she just digs deeper. It's like, that can't be the case. He would never have done that to me. And she just makes out that the information that they have is essentially wrong, or that somehow her ex is involved in this master plan and that he's been part of the abduction and that she's totally blindsided by this new knowledge, even though he's passed a polygraph test. And also other members of his family are like, yeah, we know that this is true because we saw this weird stuff happening, and one of his friends was actually chasing people away when they were calling at the home because they didn't want her to be discovered. So she has convinced a huge amount of people to believe her. And of course, the house of cards has fallen, and the only thing that she can do is stick to type. And Sheri Papini's type is to be an enormous liar. So on the 3rd of March 2022, Sheri Papini is formally arrested by the FBI. She's arrested by the police at her children's piano lesson. At this point, she's charged indeed with lying to federal agents, which she was warned about. She's also charged with mail fraud because there's been years of investigation into faking her own kidnapping in 2016. The FBI make it clear that she had not been kidnapped in 2016, that she was absolutely staying at her ex-boyfriend's apartment in Costa Mesa. So at this point, court documents stated that the FBI visited her ex-boyfriend's home on the 9th of June 2020, collected items from his garbage, including a green tea bottle that was analysed and found to have DNA matching some collected from Papini's clothing. The ex later told the FBI agents that he had helped Papini run away after she had indeed claimed her husband was abusing her. She'd then been communicating with him using those prepaid burner phones as early as December 2015. So this had been an ongoing plan. She'd also harmed herself as part of the scheme, either herself or with her ex-boyfriend's help. And this included hitting herself to create bruises and burning herself on her arms. She'd also had herself branded on the shoulder with indistinguishable letters and had him hit her with hockey pucks to force bruising and also make it appear that she'd been beaten by the kidnappers. Investigators also alleged that she'd fraudulently applied for and actually received more than $30,000 from the California Victim Compensation Board. And she apparently used that money for therapy that she clearly needed, but not for the reasons that she was in therapy. Also for ambulance services. And she also apparently spent $1,000 on window blinds. That hoax that I've just talked about cost upwards of $230,000. Imagine the hours of manpower. Imagine the diverted resources from real cases with real victims. Now, Papini's family, they were really behind her initially. They said, "We love Sheri and are appalled by the way in which law enforcement ambushed her on Thursday afternoon in a dramatic and unnecessary manner in front of her children." Now, I will agree, I don't think the FBI should have done that in front of the kids. I mean, at the end of the day, the kids should be kept out of this, but hey, they often like to do things in a dramatic fashion because it gets more press. And when they've been investigating a case that's been deeply frustrating, costs a hell of a lot of money, you can imagine that they don't feel the need to afford anybody any compassion, but those children deserved it nonetheless. Now, if she'd been convicted on mail fraud, she could have been sentenced for up to 20 years in prison. And for lying to federal law enforcement, she could be sentenced for up to 5 years. She also, at this point, faced a fine of up to $250,000 for each charge. So we're talking about the possibility of a very long prison sentence and also a big financial burden if she's found guilty. Now, initially, she was held in the Sacramento County main jail for 5 nights. At this point, a judge released her home, and this was to home confinement. Her family actually posted a $120,000 bond. At this point, she's released on certain conditions, so her travel was limited to one part of California. She had to have psychiatric treatment, which makes sense because she certainly needed it, and she had to surrender her passport and couldn't use firearms. And the judge addressed Papini directly and said, if you violate any of those conditions, there'll be further penalties. Well, of course, because she's essentially a felon, so she's not allowed to skip the country, for example, without some kind of consequence. And let's be honest, she's somebody who lies excessively and could well be like, I won't break any law, and then go ahead and do it. So I imagine that serious talking to was required. But her family are backing her at this point. Now we get to the 12th of April 2022 and she's charged with 34 counts of mail fraud and 1 count of making false statements. 6 weeks after that initial arrest and charge, she signs a plea deal. So suddenly, all of that surprise that her ex was the person who kind of orchestrated the abduction, yeah, that's disappeared. The Hispanic women, yeah, they've disappeared. She admits it was just an elaborate hoax. Now, her defense attorney, a guy called William Portanova, he said that Sheri Papini had signed a plea deal in which she would plead guilty to counts of lying to a federal officer and mail fraud. And she issued a statement through her attorney expressing remorse. Can we believe it? No, we can't. Of course we can't believe it. I mean, it's like anybody, isn't it, who lies constantly. You can't be like, I'm really sorry, because no one's actually going to buy it. But she said, I am deeply ashamed of myself for my behaviour and so sorry for the pain I've caused my family, my friends, all the good people who needlessly suffered because of my story and those who worked so hard to try to help me. She said, I will work the rest of my life to make amends for what I have done. Well, unless you end up in prison for the rest of your life, which would mean that you wouldn't be able to, but that's aside. That's just my own mind going, maybe you shouldn't be offered the opportunity to work for the rest of your life because maybe you should be locked up for being such a nightmarish human being who lies and says black is white and white is black. But anyway, I digress. So on the 18th of April 2022 in court, she pled guilty to 1 count each of lying to a federal officer and mail fraud. She told the court she was in treatment for anxiety, depression and PTSD for about 5 years. That had apparently started in 2016. Apparently she had also struggled a little bit during middle school. Oh, well, that's fine then. I mean, if you struggled a little bit in middle school, it makes perfect sense that you will just create an elaborate hoax kidnapping, waste ridiculous amounts of resources and traumatize your entire family. I mean, if we're not on a regular basis doing similar things because we've had a bad day, what are you doing with your time? We get to September 2022. At this point, Papini appears in district court in Sacramento and she apologized, saying she was guilty of lying and dishonor. She said, I am so sorry to the many people who suffered because of me, the people who sacrificed for the broken woman I was, the people who willingly gave to help me in a time that I so desperately needed help. So she's reading from this pre-prepared statement, by the way. She said, I am choosing to humbly accept all responsibility. Really? Are you? I'm not sure you are. Sheri, I'm not sure you are. Sheri, I'm not sure you are. I just keep saying that. Sheri, I'm not sure you are. I think what you're actually doing is saying, I got caught. There was no way out. Literally, my ex passed a polygraph and his family knew what was happening. And it turns out my lovely husband had done none of the things that I'd said. And there was absolute evidence that when I was in the room that I described, it was my ex's room. Therefore, I'm bang to rights. And there's literally no way I can get away with it. And I've tried, because even when they said they'd found me out, I was like, no, it's still the Hispanic women. So now I'm going to say, I'm really sorry. Can everybody just accept that, please? Can everybody just accept that, please? No, Sheri. No one's accepting it, but crack on. So Papini's attorney said that the reason that she'd done it was that painful early years had twisted and frozen her in a myriad of ways. Sorry, is this a Disney movie? Is this the let it go, let it go? But you didn't let it go, did you, Sheri? You carried it on. You carried it on for a very long time and you wasted a lot of money. But apparently those painful early years, I mean, again, all of you who had some difficulties in the past, you can now go ahead and crack on creating elaborate hoaxes, because we'll all understand, won't we? It just is ludicrous, but nonetheless, let's continue. That same lawyer said that she'd suffered from mental health issues, bringing that old chestnut in as if people who have mental health issues are going about doing these things is ludicrous. He then referenced her chameleonic personalities. What, like an organised serial killer? They've got chameleonic personalities, just throwing it in there. He said that they pathologically drove her to simultaneously crave family security and the freedom of youth. Sorry. I'm trying, guys. I'm really trying today. I'm trying to be balanced, but I can't be. What? Drove her to simultaneously crave family security and the freedom of youth. Like, hello? A lot of us get married, have kids, 15 years down the road, we're like, oh, I'd really like to go clubbing. It doesn't make us go, what I'll do is I'll just, have an appropriate relationship with guys behind my husband's back. And also I'll create a kidnap plot. I mean, that does not happen. Just because you want a bit of freedom doesn't mean that you're going to do the things that Sheri Papini does. And it does not make sense. So he then said, I think you should give her minimal prison time. So he tells the court that basically the humiliation of her actions would be its own life sentence. Well, I'm just going to throw it out there. That would be true for somebody with a guilt response or a shame response. If you don't have a guilt or shame response, and I'm hearkening to guess that Sheri Papini isn't that big on the whole guilt level, then she's not going to get that feedback. For the ordinary person, walking down the road, not realising that you've got toilet paper attached to your jeans, that's embarrassing enough and humiliating enough. That can send you on a downward spiral. But with respect, this woman just does not get that kind of feedback. Ventromedial prefrontal cortex, amygdala, not communicating. Now, in exchange for the guilty plea, the prosecutors basically seek a lighter sentence. They ask for between 8 and 14 months in custody, which, let's be clear, is a lot lower than the 25 years that she could have faced. I am going to throw it out there, guys. I'm going to throw it out there. There is a bit of a case here of pretty prejudice, isn't there? Petite, blonde, meek, Sheri Papini. Oh, don't send me to prison. I have created all of these elaborate hoaxes. I basically blamed Hispanic women. I genuinely, when I was found out, thought maybe I could hang my ex-boyfriend as long as I escaped. But really, I'm just this meek little blonde lady. Oh, don't punish me. I mean, honestly, it's ludicrous. So US District Judge William B. Shub called Sheri a, quote, manipulator. Sorry, of all the things that you could call a manipulator is like the most obvious one, I get it, but I think there's a few more that we could have thrown in. A compulsive liar, a pathological individual who cares little for anybody around her aside from her own egotistical needs. All of these things I think should have been thrown in. But this judge said, people don't like to be conned. And I don't believe those people who were deceived would believe that 1 month or 8 months is sufficient. I'm not sure that the people who were deceived would think that 1 year or 8 years was sufficient with respect. Shub also added that his goal was to deter other would-be hoaxers from doing the same thing and expecting leniency, which would make sense if the sentence wasn't actually unbelievably lenient. I mean, he's saying that they can't send a message that crime doesn't pay because obviously she'd received money for what had happened to her, for therapy and ambulances and so on and so forth, and blinds, of course, let's not forget the blinds. But with respect, on the 19th of September 2022, she gets sentenced to 18 months in prison. 18 months in prison. Now, I get it. Some people will say, well, there weren't any actual obvious victims, as in she wasn't physically abusive to somebody, she didn't go out and kill somebody and so on and so forth. But come on, guys. She went off the grid for 3 weeks, put her family through hell. Her children will have been devastated. Her husband was devoted. People were absolutely committed to bringing her home and genuinely believed that she had been horribly taken. And these 2 Hispanic women are getting blamed. So people are looking in the direction of people who are Hispanic. And she gets 18 months. Now, she did get 36 months of supervised release. She also had to agree to pay $309,902, which will apparently cover the cost of the police investigation. Will they ever get that? Probably not. Apparently that money is in restitution for losses incurred by the California Victim Compensation Board, the Social Security Administration, the Shasta County Sheriff's Office, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So essentially she will make good on those costs, but I doubt that will ever happen. On the 8th of November 2022, she actually began her sentence. Now in 2022, Sheri Papini's husband, Keith, that poor guy, the man who was devoted, he filed for divorce. He also filed for custody of their 2 children. He said that his wife was not acting in a rational manner. I think that's an understatement, Keith, but we're all with you on this one. He said his wife had lied to their children about her disappearance. He said the fact that their mother lied to them on such a major issue is something they and I are both having a hard time dealing with. He said, the children and I need time to recover and stabilise. He said that she hadn't seen the children since the 4th of April and that she'd also missed 1 scheduled visitation time. He asked the court to, quote, help me protect my children from the negative impact of their mother's notoriety. And I completely understand that. Now, according to the divorce petition, the Papinis had been married since October 2009 and they separated on March the 3rd, 2022, which was the same day that she was arrested on those federal charges. Keith Papini was actually granted sole custody of their 2 children. In an interview since, he said, I love this woman. I would have done anything for her. I love our children. I was blindsided. Now, Sheri Papini has been released. She was released from prison in August 2023. She was then transferred to a residential re-entry facility in Sacramento County. She is permitted professionally supervised visits with her children once a month. And I think that's really important because even though what she's done is absolutely reprehensible and very traumatizing for the children, also, it was noted before she did what she did, she was actually a loving parent, and I think it's really important for children to have relationships with parents as long as they are supervised in this way. and at least until they are safe to be unsupervised, shall we say. Now, on October the 23rd, 2023, she appeared in court, teary-eyed, to demand a portion of her ex-husband's insurance payout. So his California home was impacted by a wildfire in 2021. She argued that she was entitled to a portion of the payout. Now, when questioned, Key said, listen, it's gone on living expenses. I'm paying my mother $500 a month because she's looking after us. And when he was actually given a chance to speak in court, he said, listen, she racked up a significant credit card debt. So apparently she'd made a $3,200 purchase at Best Buy. So like when he brings up that this is the case, that she's spent money that he's got to pay back, she's like, I'm not gonna answer that. I'm gonna invoke my Fifth Amendment right. So essentially they're saying like, what is the large purchase that you've made? She's like, I don't want to tell you. So I'm just gonna invoke my Fifth Amendment right. And he's basically like, I am spending this money looking after our children and housing our children, and you're not even gonna admit what has played out because again, you're a massive liar. Sorry, but she is. So she invokes that Fifth Amendment right. Now on June the 6th, 2024, it's reported that Sheri was writing books. So according to notes that had been kept by a monitor who was supervising her with her kids, so this was on a visitation report from January the 17th, 2024, she told her children that she was writing not one, but 2 books. So apparently she said during this visit, do you know what an author is? Mum is also an author now. She's writing 2 books. She said, I work lots of hours to write chapters. So when I tell you I'm working remotely, that means I'm at home writing chapters on my laptop. Well, if we can say one thing about Sheri Papini, she has got a very good imagination, and maybe that will indeed lend itself to some books. Who knows? In March 2024, the US Attorney's Office also filed a writ of garnishment against Sheri, and that claimed that she still owed more than $300,000 in restitution for the case. So $309,292.93, plus a 10% litigation surcharge, which is an extra $30,929. So that brings her grand total to $340,222.23 that she owes. You won't be surprised to know she hasn't paid the sum back yet. Her lawyer says, and this again, sorry guys, I'm having one of those days. This again kind of makes me go, Her lawyer goes, she intends to, when she can. So when is that? When she can. But when is that? I'm telling you, it's when she can. But when is that? She's invoking her Fifth Amendment right. She's not going to tell you. It's as simple as that. Stop asking. Now, allegedly, Sheri Papini now lives in Northern California with her new boyfriend. And, this is the best, she's going to present her side of the story in a project set for release in 2025. I kid you not. A multi-part investigation discovery series that's going to feature her first public interview since her disappearance. Apparently, Jason Solanis, who's president of ID, said in a statement, Sheri Papini drew worldwide attention when she went missing, and then again when she returned. While many perspectives have been told, there is one point of view that the world hasn't heard, and that is from Sheri herself. Investigation Discovery will present a new side of Sheri Papini's case, told by her, in her own words. The project is slated for release in 2025. So let's just analyse that for a moment. This is going to be a story told by her in her own words. So is it going to be told in her own words truthfully, or is it going to be told in Sheri Papini's normal protocol, which is to just lie? And also, with respect, we have actually seen a lot of what Sheri Papini has said in her interviews that are literally online. So you can literally see the yarn that she spun and the lies that she told and how she just dug deeper and deeper and deeper every time that she got caught out. Now I get it. What they're going to do is do the whole, let's just think about this, guys. How are we going to get a lot of views? Well, you know that Sheri Papini. Oh yeah, that was an interesting, strange case, wasn't it? Yeah. Why don't we interview her, get her story? Isn't she a massive liar? Yeah, she is. But why don't we just frame it as the real Sheri Papini, the woman behind the lies? Oh, so we're going to go for the human interest level. Yeah. Are we going to say that she was a liar? Well, probably, but we're going to do it in a way that goes, yeah, she's a liar, but there's a human beneath the liar. Behind the liar, who's the biggest liar that's been around for quite a while, there's a human. And she has a story of being a human. And as that human, there has been pain. And from that pain, she's created an elaborate hoax involving pretty much everybody in her life in a terrible way, and essentially just couldn't tell the truth to even help herself out of any situation possibly. But we're going to go for the angle of, because she had some kind of experience that we can't define, because we haven't got anything really definable from her past. Apparently she had some middle school issues, but apart from that, we can't define it. We're going to go for the, let's imagine that there is some pain that actually gives her a license to carry out the kind of horrific thing that she did. So that's what we're going to go for. That makes no sense. No, it really doesn't, but we're going to get a lot of views. Absolutely. I'm going to sign it off. Can we make it into a multi-series? I don't know why I did that accent. I don't know. I think I sounded like a 1940s bad black and white movie. But what I'm saying is, we all agree that whatever that is, it's not likely to be based in truth. That's all I'm saying, guys. I'm sure we'll all watch it, and no doubt we can all return to this after we do in 2025, when no doubt she'll be a published author too, and she'll be working remotely because that's what authors do. I kid you not, it's been one of those. I bet you have been watching the interrogations and interviews and just going, am I actually seeing this for real? And the truth is, yes. Because even though that's real, everything behind it is just one big lie. Sheri Papini, the true life Gone Girl. Absolutely bonkers. See you again next time, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and also can we all agree, what was her ex